Okay, so good morning again, and this is the second half of the review of the mimer Havaya Li B'ozrai. And as I said, I have been having some problems with my Zoom, so if it cuts out, I will try to rejoin from another device. So just hang tight in the room if that happens, but we hope we fixed the problem last night. Um, so just to review our review, I guess. Last class, we really got through all the questions pretty much, and hopefully this class will get to the answers. So all the questions are color coded here, right? So the mimer is based on a verse that says, Hashem is among those who help me, may I witness the downfall of those who hate me. Remember, the previous Rebbe said this mimer upon hearing the good news that he would be released from his exile to the city of Kostroma, which was already after the good news that he was being released from prison and the opposite of the life sentence, as the Rebbe would call it. So this is already another level of good news. And like we said, this whole book of Defiance and Devotion is all the different teachings and letters around this event in the previous Rebbe's life. So this particular mimer is being based on this verse, Hashem is among those who help me, may I witness the downfall of those who hate me. And we have basically 6 questions of the mimer. The first one is that it seems that this verse is saying that a person has many helpers, and we know that Hashem is really the only helper. And then the second part of that first question is like, who, and if there are many helpers, who could that be? In fact, we know that people seem to get less helpers when they have difficulties. The second question is, why is David asking to see the downfall of his enemies? Why not ask for their transformation? And the third questions are, how are the two parts of the puzzle connected? We kind of leave those questions to the side and we go to 3 other questions, which sort of form the meat of the mimer in a certain way, which is there's an additional question based on a very similar idea of another quote, which is a person who comes to purify himself is granted assistance. And there's 3 questions on this quote as well, which is going to help us understand our original idea, which is that granted assistance here is also in plural form. Yeah, I mean, we can't see that, like I said, in the English translation, but in the Hebrew, it is in plural form. And so, as we said above, Hashem is the only grantor of help. So why is this in plural? Question 5 is the term to purify is transitive. Again, that's a Hebrew transitive verb, seemingly saying that we are purifying others. And it would have been better to say purify oneself, would be a different verb form, because that's what is intended over here. That's the context of the statement. Then David HaMelech says, your statutes were my songs when I dwelled in fear. And Hashem said, David, you call them songs, and David HaMelech was punished for this. And so the implied question 6, which becomes a actually stated question 6 later on in the mimer, is why was David punished for this? Seems like it's a positive thing that he's saying that this Torah was like a song. And then it talks about how David HaMelech was, what did he mean by this? What he meant by this is that the Torah is the source of the life energy for the world and its continued existence. That's what he meant by this. And then the mimer goes into details of all the different levels of what happens when we learn Torah, when we bring karbanos, when we wear tefillin, when we do any mitzvah, and when we serve Hashem in our everyday conduct according to Torah laws about how that brings existence and sustains the world. And that's sort of like, sort of the background to what David HaMelech was implying with that statement. And then the Previous Rebbe explains that why does he call Torah Hashem statutes songs? Because when he would be wandering and fleeing, which I suppose the Previous Rebbe could relate to given his situation, right? That when that David HaMelech felt the songs of or Torah to be like songs, meaning that the inner dimension of Torah was a source of joy for David HaMelech, and he wasn't affected by everything else he was going through. So now we have the question, why was he punished for that? And then the previous Rebbe explains that the word that David HaMelech uses for song also means to cut off, and that also implied in that statement of David that your statutes basically cut off things for me. But, you know, what did it cut off? That through Torah we cut off the nurture to the other side. And then explains based on another verse, right? The exaltation of God is in their throat, and a double-edged sword is in their hand. That's another verse that's explained in the mimer, and it explains that because the exaltation of God is in their throat, that there is a double-edged sword in their hand, which the exaltation of God in their throat, right, we're going to talk about this. Torah learning and double-edged sword means we're cutting off the two ways that klipa, that the other side gets its nurture. So basically, the two ways that klipa could get its nurture is either from accessing the very high levels of godliness that are beyond a vessel, that's when a Jew is very haughty, or when there's extra light that's dragged down into the lowest levels, which is through sin. So those are the two ways, and basically what we're going to see now, I think the exaltation of God is in their throat. Basically what happens is when a person is learning Torah, and then it's like a double-edged sword is in their hands, that it cuts off the nurture for klipa from both the highest and the lowest levels, and then klipa just gets whatever it was meant to get from Hashem to begin with. So I believe this is where we got up to in the last week in the mimer. We're up to section 6 now in the review sheet. Okay, and everybody can see it. Like I said, I'll be happy to email it out after class and everybody can have a copy. Okay, ready? Are we good to go? All righty. We're going to assume we're good to go. Everybody's being very... all right, okay, so section 6. Every phase and elevation comes about through davening, right? When we elevate the world around us, refine it and so on, comes through davening. Davening is connecting to Hashem, right? Remember, we mentioned, the previous Rebbe doesn't mention specifically in this mimer, but we know from other sources that davening took the place of the offerings in the Beis HaMikdash. And we know that the offerings in the Beis HaMikdash also elevated the world, right? That's why there were the four sections of creation were all represented in each of the offerings, right? There was the mineral kingdom with the salt and the animal, and the plant kingdom with the wine, libation, and meal offering, the animal kingdom with the animal, obviously, and the human kingdom with the person who was bringing the carbon. So all of the world got an elevation when a person brought a carbon, and davening takes the place of karbanos. Davening is also about refining ourselves and refining the world around us through our davening, and connecting to Hashem thereby, right? So when we meditate on Hashem and grasp a divine concept until it's settled in his mind and felt in his heart, and then he becomes drawn to divinity. That's like the ideal structure that happens when a person davens, right? They're thinking about Hashem. I mean, they're talking to Hashem, so hopefully they're thinking about Hashem. And yes, our minds do wander, and yes, we have to bring them back, and that's part of why it's called an avodah, an effort, right? We have to put in effort when we daven, and at the same time, we know that we're talking to Hashem when we daven. So the more skilled somebody is in that avodah, right? They're meditating on Hashem. They're grasping a divine concept until it's settled in his mind. That's the meditation, and it's felt in his heart. And then he gets drawn to divinity, right? That's what speaks to him. That's what he feels connected with. For some, this comes after an intellectual understanding, which comes first, meaning they understand something intellectually, and then they can meditate on it and grasp it and settle it in their mind and feel it in their heart. At a higher level, the person grasps the concept and senses the divinity at the same time, especially when the inner dimension of the heart is aroused. This is what happens when the person is able to really I guess, go through that process at once. This is the exaltation of God is in their throat, right? They're able to feel this and understand it, feel it at the same time. And when the person's inner desire for Hashem is aroused, right, the person's, whichever way it happens, this person now has an inner desire to connect to Hashem. It's aroused, it's activated, right? He's worked at it and it's activated. What happens? It results in the inner dimension of the surrounding light of Hashem to be drawn downward into the world in an inward manner, meaning it's what's called, another idea in Torah that's explained called Hamayim Hapanim El Panim. The way that we, this is what we are reaching out to Hashem in this manner of arousing our inner self to be drawn to Hashem. So what happens? Hashem responds in a like manner that Hashem responds in his inner dimension, which is the surrounding light of Hashem, this highest light of Hashem, is now drawn to us. Like he becomes drawn to us the same way we became drawn to him. So he responds by having his, so to speak, inner light being drawn to us, which means since we're part of the physical world, it gets drawn into the physical world in an inward manner, which is not something that usually happens with this light. Usually it's just a surrounding light. And now it's being drawn into the world in an inner manner. So what happens is that Klipa cannot receive nurture from it at all. When this happens, when we arouse ourselves to be connected to Hashem and elevated to connected to Hashem in that manner, through davening, Hashem responds by drawing himself down. This highest level of Hashem, which is usually beyond a vessel, is drawn into the world to connect with us as well. And because of that, this highest level, which remember the Klipa sometimes has access to if the Jew is being very haughty or whatever, right? Because it doesn't have a vessel, so therefore it doesn't need to be a vessel to receive it. It can just go straight to it. But now that light's being drawn into a vessel. And because of that, the Klipa has no access to it, because the Klipa is not a vessel for godliness at any level. And therefore, once the light of God's in a vessel, it can't receive that light because it's not at the level of being a vessel for godly light. So it can't receive the light. It's not able to. It's not large enough, strong enough, wide enough, whatever it is. It, whatever metaphor you want to use, it can't receive that light. So therefore, its source of being able to connect to that highest level of God is cut off. Because the highlights are now in a vessel, it can't access it. And now the low level has too much light for Klipa because these low levels have been elevated to a higher level. So therefore, the Klipa can't access the lower level either. It can't access the higher level and it can't access the lower level. So its extra nourishment has been cut off. So godly meditation and this drawing of us towards Hashem and everything else through davening severs both sources of nurture for Klipa. And this is accomplished with the service of davening. The service of davening, right? Like actually that being drawn to Hashem, having our inner self being drawn to Hashem, then Hashem responds by having his inner self being drawn to us, which means this highest level of Hashem's light is put into a vessel, and also means that the vessels have more light. A rising tide lifts all boats, or whatever right? So like everything has more godliness in it, and as a result of that, Klipa cannot access the high level of godliness, and it cannot access the low levels of godliness more than what Hashem originally set up in the world. Whatever Hashem set up, he set up. But we are not giving extra nurture to Klipa. That's through our service of davening. Torah study, by contrast, draws down the light, so it should be revealed. And the pnimius of Torah even refines the intellect, so it can understand concepts that are not ordinarily able to be grasped. So the davening elevates us, and then it draws down a reciprocal response from Hashem, which is a new light that's being drawn down in a way that it's not usually drawn down, and therefore it cuts off Klipa. Torah study draws down light. That's what it does. It draws down light, and therefore, it accomplishes. Obviously, we're supposed to learn Torah. It does accomplish, but it's not necessarily cutting off the source for klipa. The exaltation of Hashem in their throat, meaning their davening, is what cuts, and they have a double-edged sword in their hand, is what cuts off klipa. Okay? It sounds easier than it is, right? I mean, it's kind of oversimplified. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it. We don't understand these concepts completely in their depth, but this is something that the previous Rebbe obviously understood in its depth and is imparting to us some level of understanding of it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. If one does this, does one feel anything to know that something different at that moment is happening when they're davening? Like, you know what I mean?
Can you tell?
Well, yeah, not like, you know what I mean? People that
well, for sure,
tzaddikim would
tzaddikim
have the ability or something, you would think.
Right. Well, for sure, tzaddikim, I talks about tzaddikim, their davening is completely different than our davening, right? I'm saying, they feel something, they understand something, they are accomplishing something with their davening. I think for us, on a very much smaller micro level, sometimes I think we all experience more meaningful davening times and more habitual davening times, and for us in our experience, I think that's like that more meaningful davening time is something of this. It's not, obviously this in its entirety, that's but it's a something that's more meaningful to us, right? Like I think there are times when we feel like we really were able to connect with Hashem, and we feel drawn to Him, and it was like a good conversation, so to speak. It was like and then there are times probably that we are davening, and it's more like a check-in, it's more like just like a regular check-in, and we're doing it. And one of the more beautiful things that I learned about davening, or like this idea, that in order to get to those times, which might happen very infrequently, like somebody was sharing his experience, right? That he believes that in order to get to those times of connection, which could happen, we need to put in our time, so to speak, the daily check-in that might be a little bit less inspiring, and more just like a daily check-in. There's a pasuk he based it on, which is v'chol eis ehovreya v'ach. I think it's Litzari Yivaled. I'm not sure. Which means basically that at all times you should love your friend, so to speak, and a brother will be born in a time of need. So he explained that to mean that if we sort of connect with Hashem at all times, even if it's sort of like a friendly check-in, it's not a deep, meaningful conversation, as they say in today's lingo, right? It's just a check-in. In a time of need, when we feel like we really need to reach out to Hashem and connect more deeply, it could be in a time of joy or difficulty. It doesn't have to be, but we feel like the need to connect more deeply. A brother will be born in that time, meaning we'll have the neural pathways, maybe we could say scientifically, or we'll have the habit, we'll have the space in our day, we'll have the vocabulary to be able to infuse it with more meaning when we need to. We're not building from ground zero. And he talks about, this is Reb Chaim Dunham talks about this idea a lot, and he talks about how when he was a child, he would go visiting, his father was also a rabbi, he would go visiting these people who were sick in the hospital with his father, and he was struck by the idea that they would ask his father to pray for them. And of course, his father would say yes, but that the message was that they could pray for themselves. It's not that a person doesn't need. We daven for each other because we're asking God to do us a favor on behalf of the other person. But it's not instead of the other person davening. It's not instead of the person davening for themselves. It's not like right. We learn from the Chumash the story of Yishmael and Hagar, right? That a person davening for themselves is the most powerful thing. Like we need to daven for ourselves too. We need to ask for what we need to ask for. Or thank for what we need to thank for, or whatever it is, right? So he was struck by this idea that people didn't feel they knew how to pray, and I guess his father must have taught him this idea that we check in every day, and that creates the ability that when we need to call upon a deeper place in ourselves, we're able to access it because we formed the habit. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
It definitely does. Thank you. It's
Okay.
comforting, your answer.
okay.
But there's times when you're learning a concept and then you connect with that concept that is like davening. It's the same feeling as when you have those times when you connect, when you're davening and you connect with Hashem. Sometimes the concepts, all of a sudden it kind of actually explodes in my head, and it's the same kind of connection, I think. So I think also when you're studying Torah, when you're studying this stuff, I think that you could bring down. I think you could bring down a light that is similar to a light when you daven and you have those rare moments when you're really connecting, when you're really on a roll with Hashem.
So there is that point. I think we told the story about Rebbe Parcher, why are you worried if you're davening before you're davening? I think we said that in this class before.
Yeah.
That there is truth to that for sure. And at the same time, there is also the idea that even if a person feels that, in their davening, they maybe want to ask Hashem to open their heart to be able to apply it and refine that idea in a real way, right? That it's not instead of davening. Let's put it that way.
Oh, I didn't say it was instead of davening, but
Right. No, I'm not implying that you did. I just want to emphasize that because the next point in the mimer is going to be talking about the difference between learning and davening in that way a little bit, I think. Like this,
right.
But yes, it's true. I think that, Chassidus especially activates the heart, not just the mind. So once the heart's activated, it feels a little bit related to davening more than Torah learning in a certain way.
Exactly.
Because Chassidus does bridge that gap between the mind and the heart. It feels sometimes in a similar way to how davening it does. And yet it's not exactly the same. Like we still need to daven and we still need to ask that whatever that idea we really connected to, that can be something we meditate on while we're davening. And we're asking Hashem to be able to help us, refine ourselves to incorporate that into our service of Hashem. That idea, whatever that idea was, that really sort of ignited us,
What ignites is Hashem's boundless chesed, his boundless kindness that he allows us to. He opens himself up to us when we're learning, and to me, and there's a humility about it that he opens himself up. That always blows me away. Always blows me away when that concept explodes. And I think that is a more intense experience for me than it is when I daven.
Right. Well, you hear Hashem in Torah learning. That's the point. That's his communication to us. Okay. Are you ready to go on to the next section of the next section of the review? Or any more questions? Okay, so section 7. So the spiritual level of David HaMelech was the sphere of Malchus, sovereignty, the seventh and last of the mitvos, right? Of the 10 spheres, there's 3 intellectual, and then there's 7 emotional, the mitvos, and Malchus is the 7th, and that was the one that there's certain tzaddikim who are sort of embodiments of those supernal ideas, right? Like Avram Chesed, Yitzchak Gvura. So David is connected to the concept of Malchus. Obviously, he was the king, and his line is the kingship forever, ultimately culminating in Mashiach. So this is connected to davening, meaning Malchus is a concept of speech and communication, like a king rules with his edicts and communicates, and therefore it's connected to the idea of davening because we also speak our davening. Yet his service was focused on the inner dimension of Torah, as we learned earlier in the Mimer, right? He focused a lot on the inner dimension of Torah, learning it, teaching it, and then making halachic rulings, which were always correct because he was so connected to Hashem. In general, davening is about refining and elevating, as we mentioned, right? As the Mimer mentioned earlier, and Torah learning draws down and reveals Hashem in the world, right? These are the 2 different directions in our service of Hashem. So Torah learning, its method is of refining. The way that Torah learning refines is in rejecting that which is forbidden, right? This is permitted, this is forbidden, this is permitted, this is forbidden. That's what Torah teaches. And it elevates and refines, or it refines the physical world through clarification of what is permitted and what is forbidden. So now we're going to be answering, we're going to start answering the questions. So the answer to question 6, David HaMelech says, your statutes were my songs when I dwelled in fear. So what does that mean? That David cut off the forces of evil with the power of Torah, Hashem's statutes, his Torah learning. But that's not what Hashem's ultimate purpose was in creation. He wanted the world to be settled, which needs man to be involved with refining the environment, which is more the avodah of davening, and that's why David was punished for his level, I guess. In other words, that wasn't the right thing for him to have said. He was cutting off instead of elevating, and Hashem ultimately wanted him to elevate. Answer to question 1. This is the answer to our original question. Why is this verse in plural? God is among those who help me. Because a person's helpers are the elements of the world that he has refined. Once he's refined his elements of the world, then those elements help the person in his avodah. And it says that God is for me, right? Another way of translating God is among those who help me is God is for me, among those who help me. Havaya Li, Hashem is for me, B'ozrai, among those who help me. That's like a literal translation of the pasuk, which means that Hashem shines on him. Hashem is for me when he does this, when he elevates the world. And Hashem is among, which means within those who help, which I think was a point that Joni made at the very beginning of the Mimer. So we're retranslating this verse, Havaya Li B'ozrai, Hashem is mine, basically. He's for me. He's doing things. He's like, for me, Hashem shining on me, B'ozrai, when Hashem is shining on me when I am elevating the world, B'ozrai, and then he's among those who help me. He's among, within the elements of the world that I've elevated, and those elements of the world are now going to help me in my service of Hashem. So the translation of that verse becomes, Havaya Li B'ozrai, God is mine, shines on me among the elements of the world that I elevate and refine. He's found there, and then those elements are also become my helpers, basically. So this obviously is not in contradiction to God being the only helper. This is like, it's through God that this is happening. So that's the answer to question 1. The answer to question 2, this will automatically result in the downfall of those who hate me. Because once the godly sparks are extracted, right, this person is busy elevating the world. So once the godly sparks are extracted, there's an elevation of the godliness. the evil that is left is nullified into nothingness. In other words, there's a refinement that happens, and then it just like the evil disappears. It sort of disintegrates because its life force, like the godliness, has been refined and elevated. So that's similar to the previous Rebbe gives an example, like knocking out the shin of the Rasha in the Haggadah, right? Which says there's the four sons, and about the Rasha it says knock out his teeth, which the word for teeth is shin, or shane actually is the way you pronounce it, but ahak eshinav means knock out his teeth, blunt his teeth. But it also can mean knock out his shin. So now the word Rasha, we take out the shin of Rasha, and then the Ra is left and nullified. What's left of his, we take out the godliness, and then the bad just sort of disintegrates. It doesn't have a life force of its own. So that's what it means, the downfall of those who hate me, meaning the unsavory elements of creation will just sort of peacefully go away because we've extracted the godliness, and the rest will just sort of disintegrate. So that's what it means, that he will witness the downfall of his enemies. Hashem is with him while he's elevating the world and becomes within that aspect of creation, and that helps him do his service, and all the negativity just sort of peacefully evaporates because it doesn't have its life force anymore. Also, we have the answers to question 4 and question 5. The plural form of granted assistance is used to refer to the many godly sparks which he refined. He's refining all different elements of creation, so there's lots of godly sparks. That's why it's in plural, and that's also why the verb is transitive in the second quote. Because when one does his service of self-refinement and revelation of Hashem, one also purifies others as well. In other words, it affects not only this person himself, it also affects all the elements of creation and other people, because, like we said, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So everyone is benefited by the fact that he's purifying himself. It affects others as well, which is why it's plural. Additional ideas for question 2. David HaMelech asked to witness the downfall of those who hate me because he wanted the truth to be revealed, that those enemies hated Hashem. They wanted to live by natural means and do the opposite of Havaya and Elokim are one, which was the original goal of the beginning of the Maimon, right? To show the world that Havaya, this level that's very high and beyond the world, and Havaya and Elokim and the level of Hashem that's within the world are one, which we accomplish when we do this service of davening, and then this high level comes into the natural world, right? So David HaMelech wanted it to be clear to people that these, especially in his situation, that these two people who appeared to be pious were actually going against the order of creation. He needed it to be clarified for people to understand that clearly and not to be tricked, basically. So he did ask for that to become clear. And then the answer to question 3, the two halves of the verse do fit with each other, because we would now translate it as, when Hashem is among those who help me, then I will witness the downfall of those who hate me. Like that's a natural outcome of it. And specifically, what says I will witness means I'm going to see something, right? Because sight is connected to the idea of seeing, that everything comes into existence from nothing, and it all comes from Hashem. So that's a witnessing, right? We're seeing something, we're getting it, and we're seeing it. This level is attained by confronting opposition. Then those who help a person will be granted a revelation of the name of Havaya, and it will express it into the world. And then the level of Hashem, which transcends nature, will be revealed in nature, as we talked about before, right? This is what happens when we dig deep within ourselves, and that level of self-refinement happens in us and in the world. Then that level of Hashem, which transcends nature, will be revealed in nature. And I suppose we could say, maybe we could take the liberty to say that this is what happened with Yud Beis Tammuz, right? The Rebbe isn't saying it himself, but we see that this is what happened with Yud Beis Tammuz, that there was a revelation of godliness in the world that was completely unexplainable this very deep revelation of godliness with the saving of the previous Rebbe, and really not just the saving of the previous Rebbe, but the entire, as he said, entire Jewish community, and really the entire world, because Torah sustains the world, right? So if Jews are able to keep Torah mitzvahs, then the whole world benefits. And then he concludes with every kindness that Hashem gives a person should make them humble. It feels like he's talking about himself, right? That he's thanking Hashem for this kindness, that he was told that he's going to be released, and saying that it should make a person humble, and request that Hashem give him abundant mercy for his soul, and help him to toil in Torah in the service of Hashem, to be able to fulfill the intent of creation, to make a dwelling for Hashem in the lower realms. That feels like a tefillah of the previous Rebbe himself, for himself, and for the result of this abundant kindness that he received from Hashem. These two things, really, being switched from, and then released on Gimel Tammuz, and then to Kostroma. Now Yud Beis Tammuz being told he's going to be even released from Kostroma, and we almost hear his mission statement. Like he's thanking Hashem and humbled by it, and he's going to continue to do God's work wherever he is living after this, which is not going to be Kostroma anymore, and he's going to fulfill the intent of creation to make a dwelling place for Hashem in the lower realms, which we see. We have the benefit of this having been many years ago, when we see what happened in the world since Yud Beis Tammuz and to now, and how the previous Rebbe really set into motion the foundation of what the Rebbe took up and accomplished afterwards. So this feels like a little bit like a peek into the previous Rebbe's mind, and heart. It's a very powerful mimer. Anyway, I'm gonna stop the share now and encourage everybody in the last few minutes of class to share, to see him. Really, we should say chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek, that we should be strong and strengthened. We should be strong and be strengthened in our learning and in our service of Hashem, and be able to apply these ideas to our davening and our learning and our self-refining and refining of the world, and cutting off the clip and everything else. But I would love to hear from everybody, a takeaway, a thought, something that really touched you, and through that we can all be touched and grow and apply this mimer to our life. So don't be shy.
So I'm not sure if I just don't understand, because I'm too dense, what it is exactly that David HaMelech did, to deserve the punishment, or it sounds like the height of chutzpah, but maybe it's not that I don't understand it. Maybe it's that I don't agree, So I don't know. I maybe you could clarify that for me, exactly what he did wrong.
I don't know if we should say that he did something wrong. It's like, and I don't, it's not. We're talking about a very high level of tzaddik, and obviously, we're not. It's a very refined level of whatever we're talking about, right? But if I understand the mimer correctly, what the previous Rebbe is saying is that he was using the medium of Torah learning to affect the world versus the medium of his davening, and it was just a mistake, or I don't even know if we could say a mistake, but it was like a refined difference. He obviously learned Torah, but for some reason he was mentioning, accessing, highlighting one aspect versus the other at the time when he should have highlighted the other versus that one, or something like that. That idea.
That does not answer my question, because again, what's wrong with that?
Well, it's like using, a hammer to screw in a screw, or using a screwdriver to hammer in a nail, right? They're both necessary to build a house, but you need to use the right tool at the right time to accomplish whatever it is that you're supposed to accomplish at that moment. So they're both holy tools, and he emphasized a different tool than God would have preferred at that time. So it's not not really, I don't know if we could say from our perspective and from our perch, it's not like it's wrong or bad or a sin or anything like that. As from
Well,
David
punishment is a
HaMelech's
pretty
level,
punish,
he chose the wrong tool to emphasize.
yeah, but punishment is a pretty strong word.
Even punishment, I don't know what, I think we have to understand it on a very refined level. In other words, for his level, what does that mean? It's on a very refined level as well. The whole thing is on a level that we don't really like almost relate to. But if you could imagine somebody who has a very, very specific relationship with Hashem that's on a very deep level, and then the expectation is that the behavior is going to be that much more refined or careful. So it's at a level that we don't really even understand how close David HaMelech is to Hashem and what kind of expectation or understanding, I suppose, Hashem was expecting from him, and these two holy choices, right? That's how I understand it.
It's like Moshe with the rock, when he hit the rock.
Yeah. We have stories of tzaddikim, like very refined things that wouldn't be considered to be any kind of issue for them at that level was considered to be, Hashem took, paid attention to it. Yeah, like Moshe with the rock. Through the Zoom room, I can feel that you have not been satisfied.
Well, it just it paints it portrays Hashem as being more on the side of retribution than Rahmanas.
I don't think that's the point it's trying to bring out, though.
Oh, I'm sure that's not the point.
Meaning it's sort of like, it's like if a person is a person's a very high level executive and has a very close relationship with, the CEO, and the CEO expresses displeasure with a choice that they made, whereas everybody else, it would have been perfectly fine and nobody else would have even noticed. It's like that displeasure is like that disappointment, in this choice that this person made. That is the punishment. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, oh, there's some sort of now, if something bad happened to him. It's like that fact that he sort of let Hashem down by misdiagnosing something, or something, not even that's even a strong word, but like that, I think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about everything at a very, very refined level,
Yeah.
I probably felt how, whatever, I don't know how David felt about it.
Well, thank you.
Oh, Joni. We'll talk, Joni. I can't remember where I read this. I'll have to look it up. That must be a Jonathan Sachs essay. But what he was saying, the reason that Hashem was displeased with David when he called things songs, is something that had to do with bitachon. And I'm sorry, I'm bringing it up because I really don't have the answer. I don't have the, it was bitachon of some sort. I don't know if you can weave that into this.
I'm not familiar with what you're talking. Yeah. I'm not sure.
You know what made it, I guess, a slight bit, my mind is swimming, but a slight bit clearer is that the word song itself, how we think of song, I don't, like you said, there's two meanings to song. Didn't you?
Yeah. Song and cut off.
It means cut off also. So it's kind of, everything has two sides, like a coin. And he picked up the wrong side. He picked up the coin. He picked up the song, but he used it in the wrong way.
Yeah, but what was being cut off, but by the other side of the sword, was the klipa. So again, what's wrong with that?
Was it the klipa?
Yeah.
It was.
Well, the point was that the man was saying that Hashem didn't want that cutting off. He wanted that elevation.
Right.
There's there's the withdrawing of the nurture from or the lack of access that Klippa has to something when we do something correct versus the cutting off, which Hashem wants it to be elevated. So it was a very slight nuance, but there's a difference there. We're not trying to cut off the world, we're trying to elevate the world. Like we don't go off onto mountaintops and pretend there's no world. We engage in the world, but we do it in a refined way. So the concept that he was using Torah to cut off the klipa, that's not what Hashem wanted. Hashem wanted him to use his davening to refine the klipa, to refine the world, to extract the godliness out of the physicality, and thereby make it inaccessible to klipa. They're very related ideas, but they have it's a different
Nuance.
approach.
But if he had done that, would that be called the other side of the coin, the song side? See, I found the definition of song was key to understanding, which I'm not sure I understand because I don't read Hebrew or anything, But so if he had done that, then he could have called it a song?
I don't know, meaning, right. In other words, if the emphasis is on the song part, maybe song means davening.
Yeah.
I don't know, because the words are your statutes, meaning your Torah were songs. So, it was like he was doing it with Torah instead of with davening, I guess. I mean, that's what I understood from the Maimon. Doesn't say that explicitly, but the point is that he was supposed to use his davening. He was malchus. He was supposed to use his davening to accomplish whatever he decided to use to Torah to accomplish.
But clearly, the way he nuanced the word song was completely benign and benevolent. I mean,
of course, and he did a lot of good in this world, right? He's the ancestor of Mashiach, and the whole world line comes from him. We're not. This is not about, God forbid, bashing Daven HaMelech. This is about teaching us something very refined about the difference between Torah and davening and what we can learn from it. We're not trying to. It's like, look how nuanced this is. Even somebody as great as David, who did, needed to learn this nuanced idea.
thank you.
It doesn't sound like we're satisfied yet. I think it's a hard question. I think it is a hard question. I mean.
What I liked was one of the things beside the ending, which is it's just so beautiful, so beautifully coming from his heart. He's such a good writer, Chaya. He's such a good writer.
Yeah.
A speaker. But what I really is the exaltation and the double-edged sword, that image, because I say that every night before I go to bed. It's in the night davening, and to understand exactly what the double-edged sword is gives that particular pasuk extra power. When I'm saying it gives extra power, because I finally understand what it means. And I'm so grateful for that explanation, because I like to know when I'm davening what I'm saying and the nuances of it.
Okay, great.
That was great. That was great.
Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody else want to share anything?
I really also, Malka said, but I really like the end. It's like you toil through, and then there's, it just relates so much to our times with, if you extract the precious from the vulgar, you shall be as my mouth. When you refine the environment, that it's just like this world is just filled with so much schmutz now. It was like written, I just felt this is written exactly for us now.
Amazing how relevant Chassidus is all the time.
Yeah, really amazing. I might photocopy it and cut it out and put it on the fridge or something.
Exactly. We have lots of things that's supposed to be on everybody's
Yeah.
fridge by now, right?
Yeah, there's a skit for you, Chaya.
Exactly. Exactly. Anybody else want to share? Okay. Guess we can
I
get
think going
things-
back to David HaMelech, I think the source was actually Tanya. I think there was a letter at the very end of all of Tanya that I just read, and it's opened up David. You call them songs. I'm going to go back and read that particular letter from Tanya, and just see if because it made it so clear, and I can't.
Okay.
When you reach this age, you just kind of, the thoughts.
Yes, I think you're right. I actually think you're right, Malcolm.
Yeah, no, I'm almost positive it's in Tanya.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll look it up.
We should read that before we do our next mimer.
Maybe, but I think I'm gonna read it, and then if you don't mind, next week, just if it makes it any clearer, Joni, I'll bring it up if that's okay.
Oh, please do. And thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll wish everybody a very good week. It's Hashem and
Thank you.
Hanukkah.
Freilich and Hanukkah to everyone.
Thank you.
Freilich and Hanukkah.
Okay. All right. Take care.
Okay.
Have
Thank
a
you
good
so
week.
Be
much.
well,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Keep warm and keep upright.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So,
Good advice.
all righty.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Haya.
All right. Take care.
Thank you so
Thanks so
much.
much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.